Okay, we're going to be in Genesis 47, beginning in verse 1. Then Joseph went in and told Pharaoh and said, My father and my brothers and their flocks and their herds and all that they have come out of the land of Canaan, and behold, they are in the land of Goshen. And he took 5 men from among his brothers and presented them to Pharaoh. Then Pharaoh said to his brothers, What is your occupation? So they said to Pharaoh, Your servants are shepherds, both we and our fathers. And they said to Pharaoh, We have come to sojourn in the land, for there is no pasture for your servants' flocks, for the famine is severe in the land of Canaan. Now therefore, please let your servants live in the land of Goshen. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, Your father and your brothers have come to you. The land of Egypt is at your disposal. Settle your father and your brothers in the best of the land. Let them live in the land of Goshen, and if you know any capable men among them, then put them in charge of my livestock. Then Joseph brought his father, Jacob, and presented him to Pharaoh, and Jacob blessed Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Jacob, How many years have you lived? So Jacob said to Pharaoh, The years of my sojourning are 130. Few and unpleasant have been the years of my life, nor have they attained the years of my fathers, that my fathers lived during the days of their sojourning. And Jacob blessed Pharaoh and went out from his presence. So Joseph settled his father and his brothers and gave them a possession in the land of Egypt, and the best of the land, in the land of Ramesses, as Pharaoh had ordered. And Joseph provided his father and his brothers and all his father's household with food, according to their little ones. Now there was no food in the land, because the famine was very severe, so that the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan languished because of the famine. And Joseph gathered all the money that was found in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan for the grain which they had brought. And Joseph brought the money into Pharaoh's house. And when the money was all spent in the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan, all the Egyptians came to Joseph and said, Give us food, for why should we die in your presence? For our money is gone. Then Joseph said, Give up your livestock, and I will give you food for your livestock, since your money is gone. So they brought their livestock to Joseph, and Joseph gave them food in exchange for the horses and the flocks and the herds and the donkeys. And he fed them with food in exchange for all their livestock that year. And when that year was ended, they came to him the next year and said to him, We will not hide from my lord that our money is all spent, and the cattle are my lord's. There's nothing left for my lord except our bodies and our land. Why should we die before your eyes, both we and our land? Buy us and our land for food, and we and our land will be slaves to Pharaoh. So give us seed that we may live and not die, and that the land may not be desolate. So Joseph bought all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh, for every Egyptian sold his field, because the famine was severe upon them. Thus the land became Pharaoh's. And as for the people, he removed them to the cities from one end of Egypt's border to the other. Only the land of the priest he did not buy, for the priest had an allotment from Pharaoh, and they lived off the allotment which Pharaoh gave them. Therefore they did not sell their land. Then Joseph said to the people, Behold, I have today bought you and your land for Pharaoh. Now here is seed for you, and you may sow the land. And at the harvest you shall give 1/5 to Pharaoh, and 4/5 shall be your own for seed of the field and for your food. So they said, You have saved our lives. Let us find favor in the sight of my Lord, and we will be Pharaoh's slaves. And Joseph made it a statute concerning the land of Egypt, valid to this day, that Pharaoh should have the 5th. Only the land of the priests did not become Pharaoh's. Now Israel lived in the land of Egypt in Goshen, and they acquired property in it, and were fruitful and became very numerous. And Jacob lived in the land of Egypt 17 years, so the length of Jacob's life was 147 years. When the time for Israel to die drew near, he called his son Joseph and said to him, Please, if I have found favor in your sight, place now your hand under my thigh and deal with me in kindness and faithfulness. Please do not bury me in Egypt, but when I lie down with my fathers, you shall carry me out of Egypt and bury me in their burial place. And he said, I will do as you have said. And he said, Swear to me. So he swore to him. Then Israel bowed in worship at the head of the bed. Okay. Let's go back to verse 1. Now we ended last chapter where Joseph and his brothers had rehearsed this scenario, exactly what to say to Pharaoh when he asked, and they had rehearsed this. So now's the reality. They're really going to do it. So verse 1, Joseph went in and he told Pharaoh and said, My father and my brothers and their flocks and their herds and all that they have come out of the land of Canaan, and behold, they are in the land of Goshen. Even before Jacob came with all his family, he and Pharaoh had discussed this. So he's just letting Pharaoh know they've arrived. All of this was expected, so no surprises yet. Just everything was up front. And then the other thing, how Joseph explains, my father, my brothers, their flocks, their herds, and all that they have. Wanting them to know that they're not, I don't know what the right word is. They're not needy. They're self-sufficient people. They've just come to live in the land because of the severe famine.
They're not looking for a handout.
No, they are not looking for a handout. Exactly. Yes. And Joseph settled them in Goshen. And we talked about it last week. Goshen would have been just like the ideal spot for what they did, their shepherding and their agriculture, and it would have been perfect for that. And it kept them isolated from the Egyptians because the Egyptians hated foreigners and they didn't want to intermarry, and this kept them isolated, and so it was just the perfect spot. And I didn't even think about this. I'm getting so excited to study Exodus. So now when they leave the land of Egypt, they're just right there. It's very close to the border, and it'll be an easy exit. They don't have to go. So all of this, lots of reasons to settle in Goshen. Okay, verse 2. And he took 5 men from among his brothers. We don't know which 5. We don't know how he chose them. He chose 5 of his brothers, and then they presented them to Pharaoh. Then Pharaoh said to his brothers, What is your occupation? And it's so interesting. Joseph knew exactly what he was going to ask. He knew him so well, and he did. What is your occupation? So they said to Pharaoh, and I want you to notice this, they referred to themselves as your servants when they talked to Pharaoh, which was very respectful, very appropriate, except we're going to just make note of it, how they do it. Jacob's not going to. It's very interesting. He never calls himself your servant. So anyway, just make note of that. I think they're going to say it, the brothers are going to say it 3 times. Your servants are shepherds, both we and our fathers. And we learned last week Egyptians despised shepherds. But this is what we do. And they said to Pharaoh, We have come to sojourn in the land, for there is no pasture for your servants' flock, for the famine is severe in the land of Canaan. Now therefore, please let your servants live in the land of Goshen. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, Your father and your brothers have come to you. The land of Egypt is at your disposal. You settle your father and your brothers in the best of the land. Let them live in the land of Goshen. And if you know any capable men among them, put them in charge of my livestock. We don't know if he ever took him up on that or not, but he did make that offer. And again.
He just didn't want anybody, though. He wanted a capable one.
Yes, had to be very good at it. Yes. And then verse 7, then Joseph brought his father Jacob and presented him to Pharaoh. And Jacob blessed Pharaoh. And I thought this was so fascinating. If you'll remember when we studied Abraham and Melchizedek. So let's go to Hebrews 7:7. And we read this when we were looking at this, is recapping the account of Abraham and Melchizedek. But in Hebrews 7:7, he says, but without any dispute, the lesser is blessed by the greater. Because Melchizedek blessed Abraham, and then Abraham gave him a 10% offering. And here, he says the lesser is blessed by the greater. How fascinating that Jacob, the lowly shepherd, blessed Pharaoh. And Pharaoh is, the most powerful, Egypt's the most powerful country at that time. Pharaoh is the leader of that most powerful country. He was the most powerful man. And, and Jacob blessed him. And everything I read, this is more than just like a shalom. This is, he blessed him. And I just thought that was so fascinating. And you can tell from Pharaoh's offer to give him the best of the land, settle them, take care of them. He is so grateful to Joseph and what Joseph has done. It's just out of his gratitude. How could I do any less than take care of his family, the way he's taken care of our country and preserved it? Okay, and then it says, and Pharaoh said to Jacob, how many years have you lived? And Jacob said to Pharaoh, the years of my sojourning are 130. Few and unpleasant have been the years of my life, nor have they attained the years that my fathers lived during the days of their sojourning. So Isaac lived to be 180. Abraham lived to be 175. So 130 sounds like very long to me, but compared to the generations before him.
Did they live longer than the Egyptians?
From what I've read, and I've read this like almost every week when we talk about this, the Egyptians, their ideal age is 110. So it sounds like they did live longer. Like that's the perfect age to live to be 110, whereas Joseph does just that. But so this would have been long. And then he describes them. It's interesting because Pharaoh says, how long have you lived? And then he responds with, the years of my sojourning are 130. Yeah. And so I meant to take out the one in Hebrews. I wasn't really sure. After I thought about it, I thought, well, that may not really be that relevant. But we can look at it anyway. Hebrews 11. Is it 13? I really did mean to take it out because after I thought about it, I wasn't really sure. But, oh well. It's still a great passage, even if it doesn't apply to this. Up to this point in Hebrews, we're going through the Hall of Faith, and we've gone through Abraham. So this is really talking about Abraham more. All these died in faith without receiving the promises, but having seen them and having welcomed them from a distance, and having confessed that they were strangers and exiles on earth. For those who say such things make it clear that they are seeking a country of their own. And indeed, if they had been thinking of that country from which they went out, they would have had opportunity to return. But as it is, they desire a better country, that is, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. So, even though this is specifically talking about Abraham, it still says, for those who say such things. So anyone who would just understanding that they're confess that they're strangers and exiles on earth. I mean, it's just that heavenly mindset when you know you're living for something bigger than just the here and now. And one of the most fascinating verses is 16. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God. So, okay, and then Jacob describes the years of his sojourning, or 130, few and unpleasant. And we've lived life with Jacob, and he's done, like, at first we wanted him to be this great patriarch, and then he's flawed, and he wavers in his faith. He did things that when you're going like, Jacob, what are you thinking? And then, at the end of his life, he's so humble and just so humble throughout his life. And I don't know, I just felt like, But, So anyway, they've been few and unpleasant, especially the last 22 years when he thought his son had died. And just the grief, and, I mean, he's just been through so much. He's been through so much, but we're going to see he's a very changed man. He's become the patriarch we so knew he was going to be. It's not until the end of his life, but he does become that great patriarch. And but just life. I mean, just ups and downs of life.
But that's what made him a great
Yes,
patriarch.
exactly.
And that's in our life, our ups and downs. Is what
Yes.
either we have it or we don't.
Yes. That is such a good point. Which I think that's why I've appreciated this so much. Because he made bad choices. He suffered consequences. But he learned from it and was so humbled by it. And just, you come to this point and just his humility. I mean, he's standing before the Pharaoh. He doesn't try to build himself up. Or, I don't know. He's very humbled right here as he stands before Pharaoh. And the other thing I loved about this passage, did I put another cross-reference in there? I don't think I did. But when we were studying James last summer, and he talked about this, I think the heading of the chapter is the sin of partiality, where the Pharisees would show favoritism to the elite, as the world defines it, to the who's who of the world. And here it could have been Pharaoh, the most powerful man on the earth, or it could have been the servant's servant, and you just think he would have been the same. Like, he's not overly impressed or intimidated by the Pharaoh. And I was thinking about that, but just going back through his life and thinking how many times he encountered the Most High God. And, Pharaoh was just, I don't know, I really appreciated that about him. Just not overly impressed, not trying to build himself up, make himself more than he is because of who, he just is Jacob. And just, like I say, very, very, very respectful. But you just get the idea he would have treated everyone with that same respect.
And he wasn't intimidated.
He wasn't intimidated, he wasn't impressed, but he was very respectful. And like I said, he would have treated the servant's servant with that kind of respect. He's just so constant, and I don't know, I just really, really appreciated him in this. And then Jacob blesses Pharaoh again, and then he goes out from his presence. So Joseph settled his father and his brothers and gave them a possession in the land of Egypt. Just please keep that in mind. They own land in Egypt. They don't own any land in Canaan, well, except a burial plot. But they own land. Like, this was a huge hunk of land where they're going to settle. So they have land in Egypt, in the best of the land. And he refers here to Ramesses. Of course, I've got Exodus on my mind because I know that's where we're going. It would have still been the land of Goshen, but when Moses is writing this, Ramesses is going to be a pharaoh in Egypt's future, and so he names this area after himself. But at the time it's still Goshen, but it's going to be Ramesses, and we'll see that when we get to Exodus. Okay.
So his brothers and the priest eventually were the only ones that
Yes.
owned land in Egypt.
Yes.
Because the Pharaoh had the rest of it.
Yes. And then verse 12, and Joseph provided his father and his brothers and all his father's household with food according to their little ones. So each family according to their need received provisions. I mean, which that was the whole point of them going here. God's preserving Israel so that we can have salvation and a Messiah, and it's all leading to that. So that was the whole point of this, to preserve these. And then just as a bonus, he saved other countries too, other people too. And all of that pointing to salvation for Jews and Gentiles alike. Okay, verse 13. Now there was no food in all the land because the famine was very severe. I mean, this was like, because the Bible made the point, it is a very severe famine, and it's not just regional. I mean, this is a worldwide famine. It's very severe. So that the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan languished because of the famine. And Joseph gathered all the money that was found in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan for the grain, which they bought, and Joseph brought the money into Pharaoh's house. Notice the integrity. I mean, he collects the money for this grain. He doesn't skim off the top. Everything goes. All the possessions go to Pharaoh, and he takes it into Pharaoh, into his house. Just the integrity. And when the money was all spent in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan, all the Egyptians came to Joseph and said, "Give us food, for why should we die in your presence? For our money is gone." So Joseph said, "Give up your livestock." Okay, so up to this point, they're only taking, it probably would have been silver, but silver or gold. I mean, that was their exchange. Bring your gold or silver, and I'll give you grain. So here, Joseph understands they're completely out of money. Like, there's no more gold or silver to be traded. So he offers to accept livestock instead of the silver that would have been. So he's doing this, like, this would have been a huge favor to the Egyptians on lots and lots of levels. I remember watching Little House on the Prairie, and Dr. Baker would sometimes accept a chicken for pay, that wasn't the norm, but as a kindness, he would accept a pay like that. So he's accepting that, but also, if the livestock die because of the famine, they're worth zero. So at least now they're able to trade their livestock and get food in return rather than letting them die. I can remember my grandpa selling off his cattle during those severe droughts we've had.
I know places out in Texas where banks won't even take cattle as collateral anymore because they can't feed them either.
Exactly. Yes. Right. And so that's what he did as a kindness. So now the family doesn't have the burden of feeding their livestock or losing it. I mean, that's a huge loss when your cattle die or your livestock. It's huge. So now it's worth something. They're able to trade for food, and plus, letting the Egyptians preserve their dignity. These men can provide for their families. Like, it's not a handout. They're providing for their families. They're doing something in exchange for the food. So that was.
Is Joseph and his family still having to pay for their food, or the?
I know they took care of the priests. It's never really. I mean, you kind of get that impression but I don't know.
Yeah, it's given them so much, but then how would they, become slaves to them if they weren't having to?
Right. Well, and that could have been part of like Joseph's compensation. We'll take care of your family and make sure you're well fed to compensate for his work.
But the first two times they came for food, they got their money back.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point. Yeah, they haven't paid for it all along. But I know they care for the priests, so it does sound like they took care of Israel too, which I'm thinking back to Genesis 12:3. I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse those who curse you. And all of this is to preserve Israel. And while God's going to preserve Israel, absolutely, still, like Satan was trying to destroy Israel, like from day one, so we wouldn't have a Messiah. So he wants to destroy the country. So everyone who is helping preserve Israel is on God's side, I guess, and they'll be blessed. And those who are trying to destroy Israel are working out Satan's will, and they'll be cursed. So it's not going to go well for them. But anyway, so that could be, yeah, just.
So the 7 years of prosperity,
Mm-hmm.
as a tax, people gave a certain percentage of their produce.
Everything was always taxed. Like I was even reading, we're going to see they're going to have a 20% tax, which sounds high on the surface, but reading about other, I didn't think about it, but I guess technically this is on the continent of Asia, or Israel is, and they talked about other places in the Orient. I mean, it was up to 50% tax in this day. 1/3 at the least, all the way up to 50%. So everyone paid a tax. That's not unusual to pay tax to your government, even in this day. So is that your question?
Well, yeah, I'm just trying to understand. He did them a favor, but in the end, they ended up being
I know,
conservative.
but we're going to talk about that. We'll get there. We'll talk
Okay.
about that. Yes, yes, I have some scriptures on that. Okay, so where were we? So Joseph said, "Give up your livestock." So in other words, I'll take your livestock for pay, and I'll give you food for your livestock since your money is gone. So they brought their livestock to Joseph, and Joseph gave them food in exchange for the horses and the flocks and the herds and the donkeys, and he fed them with food in exchange for all their livestock that year. And when the year was ended, they came to him the next year and said to him, "We will not hide from my lord that our money is all spent. And the cattle are my lord's. There is nothing left for my lord except our bodies and our land. Why should we die before your eyes, both we and our land? Buy us and our land for food, and we and our land will be slaves to Pharaoh. So give us seed that we may live and not die, and that the land may not be desolate." So, I mean, first of all, you have to make note, these were the people, they're not asking for a handout. No one is asking for a handout. They're saying, please let us buy our food. And if that means working for you, then, so be it. That's all we have left is our labor and our land. And but it was their idea. And then Joseph agrees. Verse 20 said, Joseph bought all the land of Egypt. And notice for whom? Pharaoh. Joseph is benefiting zero from any of this. He's not benefiting. It's all going to the Pharaoh. So, just tremendous integrity on Joseph's part. And, I mean, obviously, he's won the respect of not only the Pharaoh, but everyone else there. He's won their respect. They trust him. And so Joseph bought all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh, for every Egyptian sold his field, because the famine was severe upon them. Thus the land became Pharaoh's. And as for the people, he moved them to the cities from one end of Egypt's border to the other. And I wanted you to remember this. Is it Genesis 41?
47. No way. You got it in here?
41:35? I may not.
Yes, you do.
Okay. I just wanted you to remember when Pharaoh had this dream and Joseph laying out the plans. Then let them gather all the food of these good years that are coming and store up the grain for food in the cities under Pharaoh's authority, and let them guard it. So they had taken all the grain to the cities. So when he removes all the people to the cities, they don't have livestock anymore to haul the grain. This would have, or to travel or to haul the grain. So you move them to the cities, and it's for easier distribution since they don't have their livestock. So for their convenience, going to move them all in for easy distribution of the food. And then I forgot to read our slave verses. I just wanted you to see, we have to get out of our heads what we think of as slavery. When the Bible talks about slavery, it's very different. And in fact, well, let's look at it in Exodus first. Exodus 21. We'll read these first few verses in chapter 21. So Exodus chapter 21, verses 1 through 6. And these are, so I think another thing to keep in mind about how Egypt is handling this famine and what Joseph is doing, this is not the government that God put in place. And when God puts Israel in place as a nation and gives them, they have very different, way that the government's going to work. But in Exodus, this is some of the laws that he's giving for the land of Egypt, for Israel, the nation of Israel. He said, "Now these are the ordinances which you are to set before them. If you buy a Hebrew slave," remember this is for Israel, they're all Hebrew, "slave, he shall serve for 6 years, but on the 7th he shall go out as a free man without payment. If he comes alone, he shall go out alone. If he is the husband of a wife, then his wife shall go out with him. But, if his master gives him a wife, and she bears him sons or daughters, the wife and her children shall belong to her master, and he shall go out alone. But if the slave plainly says, 'I love my master, my wife, and my children, I will not go out as a free man,' then his master shall bring him to God. Then he shall, what did I say? The master shall bring him to God. Then he shall bring him to the door or the doorpost, and his master shall pierce his ear with an awl, and he shall serve him permanently." This is where we get the New Testament bondservant. This is a bondservant. That's what Paul referred to him, a bondservant of Jesus Christ, because he's such a good master. I love my master. I want to serve him till death do I part, or for all eternity. John was a bond servant of Jesus Christ. So this is where we get that. Okay, if you owed a debt, you would be sent to debtor's prison, and you would stay in debtor's prison until your debt was paid. Well, you can't pay off your debt if you're in prison because you can't work. So it's basically a life sentence. So this is a privilege. Like, this is an out to not going to debtor's prison. You can sell yourself and pay off your debt. Whether your debt was paid or not, at the end of 7 years, or in the sabbatical year, you went free. They were all set free. But this isn't a mean, horrible, oppressive relationship. In fact, we've seen like Hagar. Deborah was Rebecca's maidservant. I mean, they loved her. Her death is even mentioned. I mean, this is not an oppressive slavery. This is just it's a provision to, right, it's an option. If you get yourself into debt, this is a way to pay your debt without going to debtor's prison. So it was, that idea of slavery, it's not oppressive. They didn't see it as oppressive. It would have been a privilege to be able to work to earn our food. Now the difference in Israel is they did go free in 7 years, not so much in Egypt. But they willingly said, we want to, and like I said, just so appreciate that they weren't looking for handouts. They're saying, let us earn our food, let us work for our food. If that means selling our bodies, meaning selling our labor, we'll work for it. So anyway, does that help answer that question. It's just not it's not like what we think of in, our recent history.
No.
Slavery. Nothing. Nothing.
I thought you were talking about today.
Yeah, right.
Well, I know he saved up all that food,
Right.
thinking of them.
Uh-huh. Okay, here's the other thing. When he's going around building these granaries in cities, do you understand the coming famine wasn't a secret. Everyone knew. Everyone had the same opportunity. They could have stored it for themselves. It's just, when you have it, it seems like, oh, there's no famine in sight. Things are so bad. I can't imagine things ever going bad. They would have had the same opportunities.
And this slavery, they were offering themselves.
Yes.
Provisions, whereas other slavery, like this word,
Yes.
history is, they were captured and forced into slavery.
Right. And here they're saying, let us work for our food, basically.
So basically, they're getting government jobs. They're
Yes, that's a good one. Yes, we'll work for you and you provide for us. Yes.
That sounds familiar, doesn't
It
it?
does.
And also in our recent history, back then, 6 years you could go free, or 7 years.
Yes, in Israel.
Our other history, you were a slave forever.
Well, and not so in Egypt either. They weren't going to be set for any year of Jubilee. They didn't have Jubilee or sabbatical years. But in Israel, that's just God's amazing grace. And obviously pointing towards, yeah. But
But it sounds like they did have a strong work ethic.
yes, they were wanting to earn it. They weren't wanting, just like I said, Joseph gave them the opportunity to preserve their dignity. Men could work and earn his food.
Well, imagine back in the day, they didn't have a lot of handouts for you.
No,
You
no.
worked for what
Yes,
you got
absolutely.
in any society.
Yes, even the poor people in Israel, they left the edges for gleaning. The poor had to go glean their own food. They didn't make their workers glean it and then hand it out at the end of the day. If you wanted to eat, you went and gleaned your own food. You didn't have to plant it, but you did have to glean it. So yes, absolutely. Okay. Any other thoughts on that? So in 21, so as for the people, he removed them to the cities from one end of Egypt's border to the other. He just made sure everyone was taken care of and fed and close to the granaries. And then 22, only the land of the priest he did not buy, for the priest had an allotment from Pharaoh, and they lived off the allotment which Pharaoh gave them. Therefore they did not sell their land. Then Joseph said to the people, behold, I have today bought you and your land for Pharaoh. Now here is seed for you, and you may sow the land. So they're still able to work the land. They're still able to eat the produce of their work and then pay a tax. But like I said, taxes were so normal even back then. Of course, we know in the New Testament they paid taxes to Caesar. It was just... and this was actually low compared to the other regions I read.
It sounded like they didn't even have it before, so this is like the first time they're ever being taxed.
Well, they did. I know during the starting during the plentiful years, they had to give a portion. But it was all for their benefit. It wasn't to oppress them or to hurt them. It was all for their benefit. Because if you have it, you don't really believe there's a famine coming, or you can't see the famine, you eat it. And so, or it just goes bad. And so he stored it for them, guarded it for them, and then when this time came, he was able to distribute it. Okay. And, but yeah, I don't know what they did before then, but I know during that period they gave. So verse 24, at the time you shall give a fifth to Pharaoh. At the harvest you shall give a fifth to Pharaoh, and 4/5 shall be your own seed of the field for your food, and for those of your household, as for food for your little ones. So they said, you have saved our lives. See, no one's feeling like, Joseph, I can't believe you're so cruel. Why'd you do this to us? They're so grateful. Like, they're grateful. You've saved our lives. Let us find favor in the sight of my Lord. And they trust him so much. He's not doing this to benefit himself. And then, like, may your blessings continue, and we will be Pharaoh's slaves. And Joseph made it a statute concerning the land of Egypt, valid to this day. So when Moses is writing it, Egypt's still paying 20% tax. That Pharaoh should have a fifth. Only the land of the priests did not become Pharaoh's. Okay, before we transition to the next part, do you have any questions on the...
I just noticed that he moved them to the cities,
Mm-hmm.
and that is exactly what's happening today in this country, is that the small farmers, ranchers, sheep raisers who can't make it are going to the city for jobs.
Really?
This is exactly
Yes.
I mean, it sounds like history is almost repeating
Isn't
itself.
that interesting? Except we don't have Joseph leading us.
We don't have a Joseph.
No.
Or we don't
Isn't
recognize
that
if we
interesting?
have a Joseph.
We don't know.
But yes, you're right. Isn't that interesting? It's just the way they... Uh-huh. Very interesting. Okay, well, we'll transition to this last part. Now, Israel, and I love to just make note of when Jacob and Israel, the same person, but, yeah, just very fascinating to me. Now, Israel lived in the land of Egypt, in Goshen, and they acquired property in it, and were fruitful, and became very numerous. And I just, of course, I'm so sad to leave Jacob and his family. Like, I can't tell you how sad I was just. I'm just sad. But I am excited about Exodus too. We're going to love it. So I've been reading a lot in Exodus. So we're going to look at a verse over there, another verse over there. Exodus chapter 14.
14 or 12?
Oh, what I put, whatever I put. Tell me what I've, yeah, you're right. Okay, Exodus 12. Thank you. I do have notes here. Exodus 12:37. Okay, so remember how many went in to Egypt? 70, 70 in all. Now the sons of Israel journeyed from Ramesses to Succoth. So this is their exit. This is when they're leaving. So they went in a family of 70. They're going to exit a nation. So they journeyed from Ramesses to Succoth, about 600,000 men on foot, aside from children. And a mixed multitude also went up with them, along with flocks and herds and a very large number of livestock. So they go in a family of 70. I think there are 2 girls mentioned in that. And then here we have 600,000 men. And then there are women and children with them also. They estimate about 1.5 million or 1.2 million are going to exit. So in 430 years, they go from 70 to over 1 million. And so, yes, so when he says that they're going to...
How many years ago?
430 to the day. I think it's right there in Exodus 12. It'll say 430 years to the day. Yeah, verse 41. And it came about at the end of 430 years to the very day that all the host of the Lord went out from the land of Egypt. Yeah, it says it in 40 and 41. So 430 years to the day. So if I so think my numbers are right, because we've gone through scripture, who was born, when they died, when they were born. I feel really good about that. But it'll make them going into Egypt 1702 BC and exiting Egypt at 1272 BC. And Ramesses becomes the pharaoh in so about 28 years before they exit Ramesses. So Ramesses is probably the pharaoh that they're dealing with when they leave. But
Say the times again.
1702 BC and 1272 BC. And I will tell you, can't really find charts that match those BC numbers, but anyway, I feel really good about how we came to that. But Ramesses was the pharaoh at 1300 BC, so that would have been 28 years before they exited. So he was probably the pharaoh, and all the scholars agree with that Ramesses was the pharaoh. So we're pretty close. Anyway, Ramesses was the pharaoh, and he became 1300 BC, so 1,300 years before Christ. So anyway, if you've ever seen the little cartoon Prince of Egypt, they have Ramesses portrayed as the pharaoh. FYI. Okay, so anyway, 430 years later, they're going to exit, and they're going to be over 1 million. They estimate probably 1.2 million. So I would say that qualifies as being fruitful. And becoming very numerous. Very numerous.
That's why it bothers the Egyptians.
Yes, because they became
They
so
see themselves
numerous.
becoming the minority.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, and then verse 28. So Genesis 47:28. And Jacob lived in the land of Egypt 17 years, so the length of Jacob's life was 147 years total. So I thought it was interesting. He lived with Joseph 17 years in Canaan, 22 years apart, and then 17 years together in Egypt, the land of Goshen. Yeah, just like bookended. So verse 29. When the time for Israel to die drew near, he called his son Joseph and said to him, Please, if I have found favor in your sight, place now your hand under my thigh. Okay, and you'll remember Abraham also had his servant do that when he went to find a wife under the thigh. Okay, well it just has so many, it would have been, we talked about last time, it was related to the loins in future generations. It also would have been a reminder of the covenant of circumcision, which is also associated with the covenant to multiply. So it would have reminded him of all that, the covenant to make you into a nation, make you into a great nation, to be a blessing. But then also, if you think about the descendants in his loins, the ultimate one is one we talked about this morning, Jesus Christ himself. So this would have just reminded us, and it would have, it was a very big deal for a Jew to do his, swear to him like this. Okay, so place now your hand under my thigh and deal with me in kindness and faithfulness. Do not bury me in Egypt. But when I lie down with my fathers, you shall carry me out of Egypt and bury me in their burial place. And he said, I will do as you have said. So I don't even know how to put into words the statement of faith that this is for Jacob. They have land in Egypt. They do not have land in Canaan except, the burial place. It would have been so easy to say, we have land here, this is where we're settled, just bury me here close to you all. Or, but by him saying, take me back, that is a statement of faith saying, I know that Israel is not going to be in this land forever. I know that that's going to be our homeland, and I want you to bury me there. And it's like at this point in his life, he's just learned everything God said is true. Like everything he said. And if he said we're going to end up in Canaan, we're going to end up in Canaan. It's just like such a resolve that God's word is absolutely true. And you can count on it. And so he wants to be buried back. And if you'll remember, Abraham, when he buried Sarah, bought the field and the cave in Machpelah, and it faced Hebron. And so that's where he's going to be buried. And this is so important to him that he makes Joseph swear to it. Swear to me that you will not bury me here, but you will take me back. And so Joseph does. He makes that promise that we will not bury you here. That's where Israel. I know, it's just tremendous.
But he's seeing a little glimmer of the promise, because 17
Yes.
years he's seeing how they're multiplying.
Yes.
He
I
comes
mean-
from 60 some odd to he sees in 17
Yes.
years, so he knows it's coming.
Yes. And not only that, he can just look back on his life and see how God's preserved him. In spite of himself, God's faithfulness. And he just, at this point, he is so resolved that God's word is true, and he's making this last statement.
It's kind of also to his last lesson statement to
Yes.
his future generations.
Yes.
This is my
Yes.
faithfulness. Don't forget.
Yes. Yes. And I just want to emphasize again, as we go and we read about Hebrews 11 and these men of great faith, it is not about the men. It is about the God in whom they've trusted. It's a testimony pointing to God's faithfulness. This is a testimony and a witness from every generation, every of the faithfulness of God. All these lives testify to God's faithfulness, and his word is so true. If he said it, you can count on it. And we have the privilege of studying this and seeing his faithfulness. We have it written. They didn't have it written. We have it written. We have it in front of us, and it's just testimony after testimony after testimony of God's faithfulness in spite of us.
When, as we get older, you can step back.
Yes.
And look at all that happened, and when you're in the midst of it, you can't.
Right.
But just being able to have that perspective to look and see how each thing that happened was a preparation for the next thing that
Yes.
happened.
And even when Jacob messed up, it still wasn't in vain. God used that even. All the mistakes, all the consequences, everything was being used. And that's why I think this next verse is so amazing. And he said, swear to me. So he swore to him. Then Israel bowed in worship at the head of his bed. This is this word for bowed in worship. It's such a reverent, humble, it's a very reverent worship. Very reverent. And it would have been so a picture of such humility and such gratitude. Just such gratitude over the faithfulness of God and the faithfulness of his word. Everything from when he had the issues with his brother, and he has to run away from home, and he's on his own as he travels to Uncle Laban's, and God meets with him there in Bethel and appears to him and makes this promise, I'll bring you back. And then, in spite of, all of his, he took the scenic route, but God did bring him back. Just the faithfulness of God, just the faithfulness. And there was nothing Jacob could have done so bad that would have hindered God's ultimate plan. And like you said, now they're all in Egypt and they're being preserved. He can just see why Joseph was gone, what God's done. Just all of it, and just coming to this place and just bowed in worship. Just humble gratitude towards God and his faithfulness, and just at this point.
And the brothers aren't even mentioned at all in this particular chapter,
Mm-mm.
are they?
Well, they appeared to Pharaoh.
Well, yeah, in that one,
Yes.
yeah.
We see
brothers.
5 of them. Mm-hmm.
But other than that,
Mm-mm.
all through those details.
Yes, all through those dealings. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, and last chapter he promised that Joseph would close his eyes at death, and he's seen every word God speaks is truth. If God breathes it, it's true. If it comes out of his mouth, it is so true. And just his faithfulness. So, any other thoughts or questions on the faithfulness of God or Joseph, or any thoughts on this? Okay. Yeah. Yeah, look forward to next week. And